Thanks for joining us on the Future Food Show. On this episode, we're excited to chat with Jordan Wolfe. Jordan is the founder of Cultured Supply, a B2B purchasing platform for the bioeconomy. Starting with food and beverage ingredients and products, Cultured Supply is focusing on helping companies building more regenerative and local supply chains directly from the source. Jordan is an active angel investor in the climate tech space. His primary investment focus is around full-stack industrial technology and changing our systems of production from a dirty, centralized model to a more distributed and sustainable one. Jordan has more than 20 active investments in his portfolio and is also an LP in an early-stage venture fund. Prior to being an angel investor, Jordan was the co-founder and CEO of Town Partners, a Detroit-based real estate investment and development firm. He started Town Partners in 2013 when the city of Detroit was going through bankruptcy, where he built a commercial real estate portfolio from scratch to more than 500,000 square feet. We cover a lot of interesting information on this episode and look into how Cultured Supply can help the industry. Jordan, I would like to welcome you to the Future Food Show.
Thanks, Alex. Glad to be here. Excited to talk further about what we're doing.
Jordan, I'm really excited to get into Cultured Supply, but before we even talk about that, tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I started my career actually on the investing side. So I worked at a firm called Mainsail Partners, and this was back very early in the early days of SaaS. And so I kind of cut my teeth at it was a private equity fund. Spent a couple years there and learned some great skills, but ultimately knew, I didn't want to be in like the structured fund world for a variety of reasons. After spending a couple of years there, I actually went back to Detroit, where I'm from originally. And this was actually during the financial crisis and during 07, 08. And I actually decided to stay in the city at the time because it was something that I was looking for, which was, really kind of really difficult time for the city. And I was very interested in, working on problems that had deep meaning for me. And I'm obviously from Detroit. And so I actually started two nonprofits in Detroit, really focused on attracting young entrepreneurs to kind of help rebuild entrepreneurial community in the city. And through that work, I noticed a really interesting opportunity in real estate. And so I tell people I became an accidental real estate developer. So I started a commercial real estate investment and development firm back in 2008, right before the city was going through bankruptcy. And the whole mission behind what we were doing had nothing to do with real estate. I like to say it was always around how do we move Detroit to a more production-oriented economy and create more localized supply chains. And so it was really focused on economic development. So we did a lot of work developing space for small businesses, making and designing stuff, I like to say. And the investment thesis was, though, the real estate was highly distressed. And so we saw a very unique opportunity as my partner and I, two young guys running around, to kind of see a unique economic opportunity while having kind of high impact in the local community. And it was pretty crazy. It was, at one point we had over 30 commercial buildings in the city of Detroit. And, ultimately our vision was really to create kind of like two Brooklyn Navy yards focused on small businesses making stuff, one around food production and one around consumer goods production and household good production. And that was kind of the vision we had. But we knew in order to do that, we would need public support, not just private capital. And so we were unable to get the support that we wanted for really the big vision, which would have been a public-private partnership around creating affordable space for small business. But on the fortunate side, our investment thesis held true, and we were able to receive, we were able to earn kind of venture level returns on real estate, which was like a very unique situation. But so that's where my interest, honestly, Alex, in supply chains all started, and kind of what I call our systems of production. And that's kind of stayed with me, for almost a decade now. And so basically about 4 years ago, I sold the majority of the portfolio and then just started full-time angel investing broadly in climate tech and sustainability. And what happened through that was, as I was kind of doing this transition, I had my kind of aha moment of where the next chapter, and I believe the rest of my career will be. And I listened to this really interesting, it was a video actually. It was like a 3-hour video by Jeremy Rifkin, which is he's a well-known professor and macro economist. It's called the Third Industrial Revolution. And what was really interesting is he breaks down like these 7 major economic revolutions, like starting all the way back to hunter-gatherer days. And he says, it's like very interesting. He talks about how there are these great economic paradigm shifts that bring together like revolutions in how we communicate and new energy regimes to like change how economic life works. And it also changes like human consciousness. So like when I heard this, it like completely like blew my mind and allowed me to like step back from out of the weeds of saying, where are we going as a species and where are we going as an economy? And so I won't go into all the detail, but I thought it was really, really interesting. He explained it, whereas like the last industrial revolution, so we say, like 20th century in the US, the new form of communication technology was centralized electricity and the telephone and radio and TV. Our new source of energy was obviously oil. And then our new mode of transport was obviously the internal combustion engine for transport. And so what he basically like says is, because all these 3 kind of major technologies came together, like the whole centralization of electricity, oil, and the automobile, basically what that did is that enabled kind of the global economy and global trade. So like our consciousness extended beyond just our own country, and it extended around like other like-minded people around the world. And like, that's where the global trade all started to really take form. And so then he says, and this was my aha moment on kind of the direction I wanted to go. He said, we're at the cusp of this kind of third industrial revolution, where obviously we have a new communication being the internet, a new source of energy being, wind and solar delivered on an energy internet. And then these kind of new modes of transport, which we won't get into, but kind of he talks a lot about autonomous vehicles and autonomous transport. But basically what he said was, these 3 technologies basically are all going to like ride on top of, the IoT networks. He calls it like a central nervous system. And so what he says is, this is really going to enable a more distributed, decentralized industrial revolution. And when I kind of like stepped back and looked at that, I kind of became obsessed with it in a way. And then he kind of says all of these things coming together is what will create, and I love this term, a biosphere consciousness, where like our expansion is like people and empathy will be to the entire human race and into the entire globe, especially around the planet, rather than what it was in the previous industrial revolution. So that was like setting the stage. When I heard that, it kind of really informed a lot of my investing, to be honest. And so from there, I started just writing angel checks, mostly through my network, and as I mentioned, broadly climate tech sustainability. And I landed on kind of a theme that I got really excited about over the past 3 years, and I call it the kind of full stack industrial tech. So it's this idea going back to this like whole emergence of IoT connected hardware that's going to transform the way that we make stuff. And so that's been kind of my investment theme to date. And then during that process is when I came across, the emerging field of synthetic biology and industrial biotech or biomanufacturing. And this is where I just was like blown away, because I don't have a background in science, or I'm not an engineer, but I became completely obsessed with just what was going on, just so I could understand it. And so everything from Biology 101 videos on YouTube, meeting with synthetic biology professors and bioprocess engineers just to understand what was going on in the space and how it all works. And so what I really realized was, there's this whole new infrastructure that needs to be built from kind of, biotech 1.0, which largely has been kind of, pharma going from this kind of high value, low volume molecule or thing that you're growing to more of a high volume, lower value thing that you're growing. And so like when I saw that, and then I saw all the like really interesting stuff happening around, low cost lab automation and computational biology, really like dramatically increasing like the simulation and high throughput of experiments mixed with like the cost of DNA sequencing plummeting, faster than Moore's law, it was just like this. I was like, whoa, all these things are happening at once. I think we're just going to see a total like Cambrian explosion of invention and innovation. And I realized that it's going to be these breakthroughs that will allow us to really actually, fundamentally change the way that we make stuff. And so, my kind of piece on this was, this is actually our chance if we want to like create new systems of production and create a more distributed regional, infrastructure to do this, like by leveraging all these new innovations and novel molecules and chemicals, ingredients, and products. And what I realized is this is an opportunity for us to create new supply chains from scratch. And so, that was really the background that really inspired me, for cultured supply. And when I realized that it's everything that we want to see, right? This transformation is all about human health, planetary health, supply chain resiliency, and then what a lot of people don't really talk much about, which is where I really geek out on, which is local economic development. Because the one thing we have to realize is like the last generation of infrastructure is plugged into this whole network of centralized electrification and oil. And so it's this kind of, I call it like this take, make, waste way of making things. So you take something deep out of the ground, and you have to take whatever you take deep out of the ground, you have to go to where that natural resource is. And moving that to more of a grow, make, reuse model is just like really, really fascinated me. So, how my question is, how can we move from these kind of extractive means of production to more additive means of production? And that was really the inspiration behind cultured supply.
I like that. And maybe we could put a link from that reading that you mentioned earlier into the show notes. I think that could be a whole nother discussion itself, but I think that's a very interesting way how to approach or get to a certain point. Before we get into cultured supply and exactly what that is, I do want to talk about Detroit a little bit, because on the internet, sometimes, we see discussions about Detroit that it's not such a nice city or that it needs a lot of help. But I have been to Detroit after the 2008, and it's a really beautiful and now thriving community. And there's a lot of, maybe I should say the word hipster districts that are super cool. And so maybe tell us a little bit, how is the Detroit culture today?
Oh man, you're this might take a couple hours now. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's a great question. So Detroit's such a unique place because I think what people don't realize is, back in the basically 20s, 30s, because of the automobile industry, it was the Silicon Valley of the U.S. because there was so much wealth created there, and then all the supply chains and industries in and around the automobile was created. And so they designed the whole city, and the automakers lobbied for the city to be designed in a way where it's massive. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it is an extremely, extremely large city. And it was really one of the few American cities that was based around the single family home. So what you have there is a very large footprint. And at one time, I think there was about 2.2 million people living in the city of Detroit. And then, and then it dropped down to about 700,000 people. So basically what you have is you had infrastructure made for 2.2 million people. And now it shrunk to 700,000 people. And then you had decades and decades of crime and mismanagement of the city. And then obviously just the deindustrialization of the economy, right? And local production moving out and going abroad. And so it really hollowed out many parts of the city. And so it's a very weird situation because you have a large percentage of population that essentially is functionally illiterate and is facing extreme poverty. And that's at the same city. And, we were kind of part of this movement where you have this vibrant now downtown, thanks to like so many great people doing great work, with small, new businesses moving in, bars, restaurants, just like super good creative energy. And that was like, I was in the middle of that and like really helping. My goal was to help kind of create some of that energy. I think where my hope of where it would go and where it hasn't gone. I use this term, the last thing Detroit needs is more $60 chickens and $15 cocktails. And I think that I get it because that's, there's certain market dynamics to that and how districts come together and how capital works and how markets work. I mean, that just is a portion of it. But I think like really foundational work needs to happen there. And there's been amazing work to improve the city. I just think there's a much longer way to go and many things that we need to do to help a larger portion of the population. And to be honest, that was really kind of our underlying mission on the real estate side, right? Because like we need a pathway to put Detroiters back to work, and this largely an unskilled workforce. So it's this really weird situation where it's like there's great, vibrant places, super cool places to hang out, great, amazing creative energy, but then you have this other side, and so there's some deep foundational problems there that still need to be worked on and figured out.
I see. Yeah. Well, thanks for that overview. And if you're listening, maybe now is a good time to think about checking out Detroit, whether you just want to visit or, and this is not a plug for Detroit in any way, or not a sponsored plug, but I do know that they also have a lot of startup incentives. So if you are thinking about maybe even starting a startup, I've also heard that Detroit is not a bad area. So now let's really get into cultured supply. And for those listening, the links are in the show note. If you haven't checked it out already, culturedsupply.com. Jordan, tell us at a high level, what is it and what is it that you're working on at Cultured Supply?
Sure. So it, like very simply, we're starting with, it's a B2B group purchasing platform for emerging F&B companies to really kind of discover, test, and purchase more novel bio-based ingredients. So, and what I mean by that is like it is not a marketplace. We don't think of it that way. We think of it much more of a product development engine. So the only suppliers and types of products that we work with or ingredients that we work with are from suppliers that are actually changing our systems of production that I spoke about before. And so it's like these companies going from an extractive methodology to a more additive. So what within that's companies within biomanufacturing, upcycling, and more regenerative forms of agriculture. And we're starting with food and beverage ingredients.
And you're focusing on more novel ingredients, so you wouldn't necessarily have like soy protein or pea proteins on there, unless there was maybe something special about those types of proteins.
Generally correct, but we've just in the past few weeks since we kind of put the site up, we've been getting requests as well. So we're also kind of understanding where the demand levers lie. So we're also kind of playing matchmaker now a little bit. So if there is demand for that, but yeah, that's not the general focus in what we list on the site. I think one of the things to also mention about it, so I'll give an example because actually we're speaking to them right now. They're going to be joining. It's a couple that created this kind of mini production facility for artisanal Greek yogurt, right? So our yogurt being one of the most original forms of fermentation. But what's interesting about them, it's not like their actual product is so novel. It's their method of how they're not only how they're producing it, but how they want to distribute the product. So their vision is to create a network of these mini factories, more regional factories, where they're largely serving food service and food and beverage companies in and around where these factories are located. So we will be adding additional products like that. And it's really the common theme is that everyone that we're working with wants to really fundamentally change the way that the actual infrastructure on systems and distribution work.
I see. Okay. And so that is kind of interesting actually to have that distributed type of facility, right? Something that is also kind of getting us closer to better sustainability practices as well. And that's a really good example of how maybe that product is novel. You have kind of two markets here, right? You're marketing towards the buyers. And I think you said those are more food service. And then you have the manufacturers, which then go into the marketplace. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly right. I think, even drilling it down even further, what on the buyer side, we characterize it as kind of emerging F&B brands that have alternative distribution models. And what I mean by that is they have a direct relationship with their customer. And so the reason why that's really important is because they don't have to go through the traditional wholesale model for purchasing their product. It's a really important point, which we'll talk about. So this would include things like virtual brands, ghost kitchens, multi-unit fast casual restaurants, hotel, hospitality, and also CPG companies that have real regenerative ingredients as core and part of their ethos as well. But it's a really important part because these companies have three things like that in common with them. They have a direct relationship with the customer, as I mentioned. They have unit economics and a business model that can handle some of these higher cost ingredients. And then lastly, and this is like really where a big hiccup in the market that we see is they actually have chefs and the artists on their team to really handle a lot of this product development. So that's one of the big gaps we see in the market now is people want to use these ingredients, they just don't know how to use them.
I see. Okay. And you might even not only kind of show how to use them, but also introduce them to maybe products they had not thought about that could benefit them in some way.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly right. And one example I like to give, which is like one of my I can't say too much about it yet because we'll have some news hopefully in the next couple months coming out of it. But essentially, like if you think about these new models of kind of digital first dining and like a concept of a virtual brand or a virtual food hall, what these companies really allow for, which is like this is changing the game around product development, is they can go from test kitchen to testing something with their consumer base and their customer base within 6 weeks. Traditional F&B companies, they might have a 1.5 or 2 year long development cycles. And so when you think about this is much more working with buyers programmatically saying, hey, I want to incorporate more regenerative ingredients and these more new novel forms, they work with suppliers of these novel forms of production. And I actually can do things like spin up a kelp burger concept or an upcycled bakery. And I can do this in a way that I can test stuff in a very iterative fashion. If it works, great. We can kind of continue to grow that. If it doesn't work, then we can continue to try things that kind of push the envelope and help them differentiate in the market.
Great. And I guess on either side of the marketplace, whether you're supplying or buying, what are some of the minimum quantities that you're looking at? Is there a minimum?
Yep. So it's a really good question. So this is kind of part of the whole the minimum's different product by product. So you can go look. We have a handful of products with our beta on our beta platform that you can check out. But they're largely anywhere. It's a total purchase. It can be as low as sometimes $600 or $1,000. So they're not very large purchases. And so the idea also being that we believe that this movement, if we want to change the system, needs to be more of a bottoms up movement rather than a top down. And that's kind of what we want to help enable and help create. So it's going to be these companies that want to start building with each other's ingredients and create the products and doing it in a way where they can access smaller volumes. And because we're dealing with several buyers and we're working with the suppliers directly, we have the ability for them to actually fulfill some of these smaller orders.
Okay, cool. And so you've launched the beta and the marketplace is starting to fill up. What's next for you? Is it building up and refining? And maybe I should say that this question is more short term. So what's next in the short term?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there's kind of three things in the immediate short term. One is we will be adding. So like I said, we're very programmatic in how we're adding the suppliers because obviously all this stuff takes time. So we will be adding additional suppliers like over the next few months. But this is not about a volume game of suppliers, right? That's not what we're trying to do. So we'll be adding select suppliers, and then we are going to be working with. The goal is to build up a network of buyers that want to work in a more programmatic sense. And what I mean by that, it's not like these one-off ingredient purchases. It's these companies that want to get into this flow of starting to incorporate these ingredients and these products on their menu. So our goal over the next few months is going to be start launching some of these basically relationships and concepts with a few of the buyers. And then the other thing that we're doing in the background, which we'll talk more about later, it's really about value chain mapping. So we're doing a lot of grunt work on the back end of mapping inputs and outputs of specific value chains. And the first one that we're going to be launching will be around algae. So if you think about a very easy to use resource, if you want to incorporate algae anywhere along your value chain and you want to build with algae, the ability to easily find, source, and procure that based upon the thing that you need within the algae value chain.
I asked this question because a lot of times on this show, we are looking to be free of animal products. Is your focus to be completely animal free, or would you have animal based products on there as well, not including, cell cultured?
Yep, we will. We will have. I mean, we're not restricted on animal-based products. So it's like I said, this is like a really important distinction, which you won't really see. It'll come through over time with really what we're trying to do. It's really, and like this is why I put more regenerative agriculture in there as well. Is like this is really about just changing from these big centralized industrialized ways to make things to much more regionalized ways to basically not only make things but also distribute. So we won't necessarily be animal free. For instance, this yogurt producer that we're working with is not animal free.
Right. Okay. And I guess, looking at the long term, what can this become?
Yeah, it's we have a pretty big vision for what this would be. But I always say, our dream would be what I call kind of one-click production, for lack of a better term, where it's like if you're someone that wants to build with nature, to easily search and find the inputs available, to be able to source those inputs in your supply chain from the source closest to you and make that as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. That's our North Star. And there's many gaps in the market. We're learning every day, and there's a lot that needs to be built to get there. But that's the future we want to help create.
I think as consumers looking in, sometimes we think, why is my produce not grown locally, for example? And then when you look a little bit deeper into the food system, you'll see that it was never necessarily built up to be efficient in that type of way. And so I think what you guys are doing is really kind of setting our ingredient manufacturers up for a future that, maybe we should have thought about earlier, but now is our time to create that. And you're starting to see that more with some indoor farms or vertical farms that are being built right outside of major cities or hubs. Outside of Davis in California here, we have something called Gotham Greens, and they're growing different types of, right now, leafy greens, and those are sold to local markets. And I think in the future, a restaurant or a brand or a CPG manufacturer might be able to go to Cultured Supply and say, I need this, or that ingredient, and these are the ingredients that are close to me or are exactly what I need, or whatever it may be. So that's a very cool vision.
Yeah, and I think something that I talk a lot about. We didn't even, I think all of this was, by the way, informed by like the problem that I keep seeing happen with a lot of these ingredient providers today. There's a very strategic reason why we're starting with this kind of idea of kind of the direct group purchasing, and but basically. Two things that I found I think is important to note, like kind of the major blockers that we see in the food industry. It's like, obviously, as anyone in the space knows, is like volume is too low, prices are too high. And so there's a scalability issue here, right? And so for my investing activity, a lot of the conversations around with product focused companies was they're making something novel or new, let's just say an alternative protein, and then basically they raised some money, and then they started to grow. Maybe they started to sell it. They started to get at a pilot scale, and then they're like, okay, I need to raise another round to get to commercial production. I'm going to go to the large corporates. I need to get the market validation or a supply contract so I can raise my next round of funding to build my production capacity. And the large corporates saying the same thing over and over again, which is like, okay, I'll take as much as you. I need a lot of this stuff at a much lower price. So you need to scale up your production capacity before we can actually do business together. And so there's this constant chicken and egg. And I get it, because scale matters so much in production. And so this was kind of part of the way that one of the things that we identified is like, well, we need to start pulling some of this demand forward in a more bottoms up way, rather than having to go to that large corporate or to get that strategic investment to go into that like traditional system of, wholesale distribution and the technology that was based upon this last industrial revolution.
I'm not sure if you've publicly announced, but do you have any plans for fundraising for Cultured Supply? in the near term?
Nothing in the near term. To be candid, it's all self-funded, and we have a great team working on it. And I think what we're really focused on is what we're doing is not easy, of course, but it wouldn't be fun if it was. So these first 6 months that we're like really jamming is really about really continuing to listen to both the needs of both the suppliers and more important, the buyers. And so one of the things that we launched alongside these kind of the handful of beta suppliers and campaigns is a procurement hotline. So what we have found has been very interesting is we started having companies reach out to us with their procurement and sourcing needs. So we're starting to understand a little bit more where demand levers lie. And what's interesting about that is then it allows us to start thinking about, when you think about, buyers in aggregating buyers, doing it obviously by product and by geographic region, because that's actually something really, really important. You can't kind of have a spray and play approach to this and it be successful.
I see. I want to, knowing that our audience has listeners that are in cell cultured meat companies, precision fermentation companies, what pitch would you make to them to join the platform?
Yeah, I would say, for me, it's very simple, which is, I think that from all the conversations I had, everyone that's been from the variety of backgrounds that have been, the reason why they've got involved in this type of work is they want to truly make an impact, obviously, on both human and planetary health. We have to change the way that we make things, especially as it relates to how we treat livestock and looking at alternative sources of protein. And one of the things that I say is, if we want to create system level change that lasts for generations and generations, and if we want to see systems of production that benefit local communities and that can actually change the way that how we get more fresh and more nutritious food to people's plates, I believe it's going to have to be done. All these things will take time, but I believe that a big portion of this is a bottoms-up approach. So I think that if you want to be part of a group of a community of people that are really looking to change the way not only that we make stuff, but how kind of the underlying distribution for that works, then I would highly encourage them to come come take a look at what we're doing. And it's a really important thing, and I'll give you a little tangent here, because it's always been in my head for literally almost a decade. So my wife, who I mentioned is from France originally. When she moved to Detroit, she started her own chocolate lava cake company, so fondant chocolat in French, and she had this great little business. She started selling at the farmers markets, and then it just started growing from there. Then she started doing catering. Then Air France picked her up, and her cakes were served on the airplane between Detroit and Paris. And it just started growing. And then she came to this impasse where she had to make the decision: do I want to get bigger distribution? And so she decided to go get bigger distribution with a group of local and regional supermarkets. But the only way she could do that is she had to go through the traditional wholesale model. And in order to do that and make the numbers work appropriately, she would need to sacrifice some of the quality and the ingredients, and it was something that she was not willing to do. And so I realized that a lot, especially the CPG companies, but if you're a food company working in this space where margins are already tight, you're kind of left with two options right now. If you want any type of real distribution, you're left with a direct to consumer approach, which is a whole different thing, which is just becoming more and more difficult to make the numbers work. Or you have to go through the wholesale distribution model. And it's, I call it the 50-50 model, where everyone needs to make their 50 or even 30% margin to get on the shelves of the retailers. And then the companies don't have any other choice. And so I don't believe that we can create system level change through that model. I actually believe that where the big hiccup comes is at the distribution level. And if you think about it, it's because the way that distribution works, it's connected to this last, like I'm going to go back to what I started with, this last generation of systems of production that's based upon the centralization of electrification and oil. And so it's not based upon, the distribution is not based upon servicing a more distributed regional infrastructure. And so I think that's where the challenge is. And by the way, I think that challenge is in the same for all industry, not just food and beverage. So I think that is where the big problem that I see. And so that's part of the problem we want to help. We want to help, okay, maybe can we create a better system? And I think the right way to start with this is, like you said, getting the products in the hands of the chefs and the companies that have direct relationships with their customers that have scale and have the ability to rapidly prototype and try different products on their menus.
I like that. And, it's early and now I'm hungry for some lava cake. So
they're pretty good, man.
Jordan, thank you so much for joining us. You can check out Jordan on LinkedIn. Jordan Wolfe, and Cultured Supply is currently live in, I guess, a beta format at culturedsupply.com. And we'll put those links in the show note. Jordan, do you have any last insights for our listeners today?
The last thing I would say is, we're having a lot of fun, and I think when you're working on such an important problem and working on kind of how do we help create better systems for generations to come, it's just really energizing. And I encourage anyone to reach out. We're constantly learning. We're making mistakes, just like everyone's making mistakes, and so we want to understand and connect with other like-minded people, because if we're going to really use this seminal moment of these breakthroughs in science and technology and engineering to actually create systemic change, I just think a lot of it is going to come from a more bottoms-up movement. And anyone that's looking to be a part of that, we'd love to talk and chat further and see how we can create value together.
Great. Jordan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Alex.
This is your host, Alex, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
This program was produced by H Media. See you soon.